Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Dwayne Quasey Wright. I have the privilege of serving as an assistant professor of higher education administration, as well as a co-program director, along with Denise Dorch, of our higher education program. Here at GW, particularly for GSEHD, I also serve as the director of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. And it is in that capacity that I have the distinct pleasure to welcome you to our 2026 MLK lecture. This is GSEHD's annual contribution to King Week. King Week, which is put on by the Multicultural Student Services Center. Shout out to the MSCC here at GW. A little history of this event. I entered GW in the fall of 2019, and the spring of 2020, nothing happened besides COVID. But in January of 2020, I approached the then director of the MSCC, Mike Tabscott, about doing a lecture on the non-performativity of King celebrations. And then when I was director, we promptly did a King celebration for GSEHD. And that was because Director Tabscott at the time said that he was going to having lots of difficulty getting academic partners for King Week. So this here is the Graduate School of Education's contribution to King Week. On behalf of our interim dean, Lionel Howard, our interim academic dean, Jennifer Clayton, but most importantly, our faculty, students, and staff, the Graduate School of Education welcomes you to today's event. Thank you to all our co-sponsors, of course, the MSCC, the Department of Educational Leadership, but most particularly the International Education Program, for which Dr. Cha represents, and she will be our lecturer here tonight. Also, a shout out to Elliot. For those that don't know, most, if not all, of our faculty in the International Education Program at GSEHD have either affiliate or formal presentations with the Elliott School of International Affairs, and clearly today's topic about refugees, refugee students, and teachers in Sub-Saharan Africa bodes well. So for anyone visiting from Elliott, a big shout out to you as well. What I typically do in this introduction, since it is part of King Week and this is the King Lecture, is to leave you with some quotes. So today I want to leave you with 3 quotes that King said that I thought highlighted different aspects of the event this evening. And I'm just going to read them to you, if you will. We'll just take King at his word. The first is on the function of education. And this is Dr. King speaking when he was a student at Morris College. Shout out to our HBCUs. The function of education, therefore, is to teach one to think intensely and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. And I know that we're here to talk about a research project on teachers. And I want to shout out all the teachers, whether it be K through 12, higher ed, in the audience today. It was a teacher that took a small, short, Black boy from New York City who always got in trouble because he said everything that was on his mind and really carved him into a professor that now always gets in trouble because he always says everything that is on his mind. But I think I would not be here as Dr. Wright, as Dwayne Wright, and quite frankly, for those of you that know the plight of many Black boys in America, would not be here if it wasn't for the teachers. But then you might say, Dr. Wright, you might say, GSEHD, we've got enough problems domestically. Why are we going over and thinking about teachers in Sub-Saharan Africa? Well, King has a quote for you as well. This is King after accepting his Nobel Prize, and he actually won that Nobel Prize. This is the great problem of mankind. We have inherited a large house, a great world house in which we have to live together. Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu, a family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with one another in peace. And these were King's words. And I just want to say that we should not think about the suffering of teachers or the suffering of our refugee students in terms of borders, in terms of, gates. Rather, we are here to celebrate the life and times of Dr. King, who forged us to a beloved community. And the beloved community has no walls. The beloved community has no separations. The beloved community takes the ideas from research and speaks to us all. The final quote I'll give you before we get started is on the fierce urgency of now. And I know that many of you in the audience, particularly at a time like this, in our nation's history, may feel overwhelmed. And because you don't know what you can do, sometimes it paralyzes us to do nothing. But for here, King has a word as well. We are also come to this hallowed spot to remind America, and this, of course, is from the March on Washington speech, of the fierce urgency of now. There is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquil drug of gradualism. And I would just like to implore the entire audience, no matter what you're doing right now, it is the right thing. No matter how you're actually contributing to your resistance or your celebration of what's going on in America, it is the right thing. The thing that calls for is not one particular action, but rather action. We are afraid. We are educators here. People know that GSEHD is going through a reorganization. Fear and anxiety, quite frankly, if I had to be honest, runs through the building. However, bravery is not action in spite of fear or in the absence of fear. It's action even in the presence of fear. So if you today are feeling a little anxious, if you're feeling a little afraid, I want to ask you to find your contribution. Here at GSEHD, we found ours, and that is the research that will hopefully contribute to making the world a better place, if you will, a little more like King's beloved community. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to engage in a research project. I always say this, that GSEHD has many, many, many events which we engage in difficult and controversial ideas. This is not one of them. The whole purpose of this event is to hear from Dr. Cha, examine the research, and give her questions and comments to get the paper towards publication. After Dr. Cha, you'll hear from Dr. Laura Engel, one of our full professors here at both Elliott and GSEHD, and then we will engage with you with questions and Q&A. Feel free to put questions throughout. We'll get to as much as we can at the end of the presentation. So now, without further ado, before we get to Dr. Cha, a GSEHD tradition here at the MLK lecture is to invite last year's lecture to come and introduce this year's lecture. And if you didn't have the opportunity to see it last year, through the magic of the internet, I'm going to give you another opportunity. Ethnographic Witnessing and Methodological Pauses was a presentation given by the 2025 GSEHD lecturer, and that man is Pablo Montez. Dr. Montez is from Texas Christian University. And if you want, you have the opportunity after Dr. Cha's presentation, unless you're a very good multitasker, to re-engage with Dr. Montez's work after this presentation. So now I invite Pablo to introduce Dr. Cha for her 2026 lecture. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright, for the invitation to present or to introduce Dr. Cha, and I'm going to read Dr. Cha's bio, and excited to share and witness the amazing work that they're doing. Dr. Jihae Cha is an assistant professor of international education at the George Washington University's Graduate School of Education and Human Development. Dr. Cha's research interests examine the intersection of educational quality, sense of belonging, gender, and psychosocial well-being, and the ways in which they influence students' academic motivation, persistence, and transition in forced displacement caused by armed conflicts and natural disasters. Her recent research project uses a narrative inquiry and participatory action research in navigating a sense of identity and self and belonging among populations with refugee backgrounds in the United States. For the past decade, Dr. Cha has been actively involved in multiple research projects that examine urban refugee education, teacher professional development, accelerated education, and early childhood education with a focus on East African countries, moving away from deficit discourses that emphasize the vulnerability, passivity, and powerlessness of displaced population. Dr. Cha's research focuses on taking a balanced approach that explores both challenges and opportunities that exist in education for students with refugee backgrounds. In addition to her expertise in education in emergencies, Dr. Cha also worked as a research fellow for the United Nations Academic Impact Korea, where she developed a global citizenship curriculum for university students in Korea and taught multiple courses at Ending Global University on capacity building in international educational development. More recently, Dr. Cha worked as a postdoctoral research scholar at Arizona State University's Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College, where she co-led the monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning team of the MasterCard Foundation Scholars Program e-learning initiative in 10 universities in Africa, Central America, and the Middle East. If you could all join me in welcoming Dr. Cha and her lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wright, for the inspiring quotes. I wrote all of them down. And Dr. Montes for that kind introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us, faculty, colleagues, students, staff members of GSEHD and GW. I appreciate your time and your insights in advance. Today, I'm introducing an emerging research agenda focused on strengthening system support for teacher well-being and teacher retention in Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm genuinely excited to speak about teachers in Sub-Saharan Africa because my interest in this topic goes back to my master's studies in international education nearly 15 years ago, and it has only deepened through years of working closely with teachers, educators, especially in East Africa, and more recently here in the United States. It feels like a privilege to share this conversation today about a profession and a community of practitioners whom I deeply admire and hold in great respect. While I'm the one speaking today, I also want to emphasize from the very beginning that what I'm sharing reflects a deeply collaborative effort. This work is being developed through a partnership between two UNESCO chairs, one based at the University of Nottingham in the UK, and the other here at GW through International Education Program. So I'll say more about this collaboration and what it means for the project later, but it's important to note that this is not an individual agenda, it's a shared and evolving one. Another thing also want to name up front that this is not a finished project. Actually, it's something that we're just beginning. We're intentionally treating this as a design or envisioning space. I'm sharing our current thinking to invite your engagement, especially around how we can design this work with deep humility and genuine shared ownership with our local partners. Before I move on to the overview of today's presentation, I also want to highlight that I want to frame teacher well-being not only as a technical staffing issue, but as a dignity issue. It asks us to consider what it truly means for education systems to honor and support teachers. And shout out to all the teachers in this Zoom who stand at the very forefront of education and carry the daily responsibility of nurturing, guiding, and sustaining our children's learning and futures. So here's how I'll proceed today. I'll begin with briefly introducing the global trends in teacher well-being and retention, why this matters now, and why it matters acutely in Sub-Saharan Africa. Then I'll introduce our vision grant and the commitments guiding how we want to work. From there, I'll walk through the draft, quote unquote, draft research questions and our collaborative approach. I'll close with next steps and an invitation for your response and critical input. UNESCO Global Report on Teachers estimates that 44 million additional teachers are needed globally by 2030 to achieve universal education goals. That is at the primary and secondary levels. The number matters not only as a labor statistic, but it captures a deeper reality. Teacher shortages ripple outward into classroom conditions, instructional quality, and most importantly, educational equity. Overcrowded classrooms reduce opportunities for individualized support, and those effects are felt mostly strongly by students who are quote unquote vulnerable or those who already face structural disadvantages. What I find particularly important is that UNESCO emphasizes retention, not just recruitment, as a central driver of this gap. Education systems are not only trying to add teachers, they're also trying to prevent the continuous loss of teachers from the profession while expanding to serve the growing student population. So when we think about, or when we talk about teacher shortage, we also must talk about why teachers leave and what it would take for them to stay. UNESCO defines attrition as teachers permanently leaving the profession, not simply transferring between schools, but leaving. And globally, attrition has become an urgent challenge. Between 2015 and 2022, the global primary teacher attrition rate nearly doubled from 4.6 to 9%. UNESCO also makes clear that attrition is multi-causal. It reflects push factors like difficult working conditions, pull factors like alternative employment opportunities, and personal circumstances such as health or family responsibilities. There's no single cause or no single fix. So one reason attrition is hard to address is that systems often look for one lever, salary, training, or short-term incentive, when in reality, we know that teachers' decisions emerge from many pressures stacking together over time. And this complexity becomes even more pronounced in Sub-Saharan Africa, where shortages are most acute. Sub-Saharan Africa faces the most severe teacher shortage in the world, with an estimated need for 15 million teachers by 2030. What is crucial here is that this demand reflects not only population growth, but also the need to replace teachers who are leaving the profession. In fact, nearly half of all future recruitment is driven by attrition. Systems are in many ways running just to stay in place. This figure on the left makes that reality visible. Replacing teachers who leave is almost as large as a challenge as creating new teaching posts. Retention then is not a side issue. It is central to whether education systems can stabilize and sustain progress. What is encouraging for the past decade is that we now have the data to see this clearly. 10 or 15 years ago, attrition was barely visible in planning models. Today, it is explicitly built into projections and workforce estimates. But this story is not only about numbers. At the same time, as systems are expanding, the proportions of qualified teachers, quote unquote, is declining, especially at the secondary level. So we find ourselves in a troubling situation, recruiting more teachers while losing trained ones. Expansion and quality are moving in opposite directions. And behind every one of these bars are real teachers navigating difficult working conditions, limited support, competing life pressures, and attrition is a systems issue, but it is lived at the deeply human level. More importantly, some teachers are much more likely to leave than others, and some schools, especially rural and disadvantaged ones, are affected far more. In this sense, attrition is not just a workforce problem, but is an equity problem. We also understand attrition differently today. It is increasingly linked to teacher well-being, to stress, burnout, safety, workload, and the daily conditions in which teachers work. And these are not secondary issues. They directly shape whether teachers remain in the profession or not. And underneath all of this is a financial reality. In many countries, most education budgets are already and used to pay salaries. That leaves very little space to invest in teacher training, professional development, ICT support, and the kinds of policies that help teachers feel supported and stay in their jobs. I am not able to look at the chat, so if there's any issues, please let me know.
We'll get to the questions after Laura.
Oh, the
Keep going.
questions. Okay, great. I was just dying to see the chat, but I'll continue. But thank you, Dr. Wright. In the interest of time, I'm going to move past this slide quickly, but I want to briefly note what it captures. It summarizes three major constraints that are especially important in sub-Saharan African context. First, many classrooms far exceed the recommended benchmark of 40 students per teacher. And in some rural areas, class size can reach to 60 or more. In the context where I worked at, in a Kakuma refugee camp context, we witnessed 100 to 150 students in one classroom. Second, access to trained and qualified teachers remain highly uneven. Even when a teacher is present, they may not have received adequate preparation, and marginalized communities are most affected. Third, geographic inequities are central, with remote and rural regions consistently facing greater shortages and weaker professional support systems. Before moving forward, I want to shift us from structure to lived experience. Everything we have discussed so far, class size, uneven training, shortages in rural areas, and limited resources, ultimately show up in teachers' daily lives. These system constraints are not abstract. They are felt in teachers' bodies, emotions, professional relationships, and so on. And that is why teacher well-being becomes such a critical lens. On this slide, I'm using well-being in a broad sense across 4 connected dimensions. Physical well-being reflects exhaustion from large class sizes, poor facilities, long working hours with little opportunity for rest. Emotional well-being speaks to burnout that comes from supporting students with complex needs while lacking adequate resources or recognition. Psychological well-being includes the chronic stress and anxiety of trying to meet high expectations under constrained conditions. And social well-being points to professional isolation and the absence of strong collegial network and support from school leadership. So together, these dimensions remind us that teacher well-being is not an additional concern layered on top of retention, but it sits at the very center of it. When well-being is weakened, retention becomes fragile. So if teacher well-being sits at the center of retention, the question becomes, how do we study and support it in ways that are grounded, respectful, and genuinely useful to the systems and communities involved? And that is the space our project is trying to enter. Our Spencer Vision Grant is titled Enhancing System Support for Teacher Wellbeing and Retention in Sub-Saharan Africa towards a place-based collaborative research agenda in Senegal, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. I know it's a long title. It is intentionally a planning grant, and I'll explain more in detail. And that distinction matters because our goal is not to arrive with a predefined solution, but to create the conditions for building a shared research and action agenda with local partners, one that can support longer term, hopefully transformative, and ideally partner-led work. And building on that, we think of this grant as creating a design space. By that, we mean 3 things: generating knowledge that is locally grounded, co-designing spaces of collaboration that brings together multiple partners, fostering the conditions for change that can be sustained beyond a single project or funding cycle. And I also want to highlight that we anchor this work in 4 commitments. First, humility, recognizing what we do not know and what we cannot assume. Second, co-construction, designing with partners rather than for them. Third, time, respecting that meaningful change does not follow externally imposed timelines, which we often witness. And fourth, accountability, being responsible first to the communities and educators we work with, not only to funders or academic audiences. I want to hold an important balance here. Humility and construction must never become excuses for inaction. I know Dr. Wright shared this quote, but Dr. King warned us against the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. And that reminder matters in this context. Teachers and students are living these realities now, not in some distant future. So urgency is real. So our ethical challenge is not choosing between urgency and humility. It's learning how to act urgently while refusing solutions that are externally imposed or disconnected from local realities. Holding that tension between speed and care, action and listening is at the heart of this project. So our initial country profiles come from existing literature and from existing relationships that are already in place. In Senegal, questions of retention are strongly shaped by urban-rural inequalities. Tanzania, attrition is closely tied to low salary, limited professional development, difficult working conditions, and so on. Zimbabwe, rural retention challenges are especially acute, and the presence of UNESCO's regional office provides important partnership infrastructure. These contexts are different, but they share systemic pressures. And that is why one longer-term aspiration is that a transformative grant, which we hope to apply later this year, could support South-South learning across these networks, these countries, cross-country networks, rather than treating each country in isolation. I also want to be transparent that this design remains open. It leaves space for future collaboration with other systems that we can explore, such as Ghana, which we already have amazing network with alumni, could become a meaningful partner if local priorities, governance structures, and partnership point to that direction. So we're open to exploring other systems as well. So this slide, I know it's text heavy, apologies, captures a shift in how we understand retention. So rather than seeing retention as a simple cause and effect problem, we approach it as a systems issue shaped by interactions across multiple systems. You may be aware of all these, micro level, teachers' daily experience, at meso, schools and communities, exo, distinct policies, and macro, looking more at national frameworks and financing. So these layers constantly influence one another, and that is why retention is not linear and why small changes in one part of the system can ripple across others. So our focus is not only fixing individual problems, but on building what we call influence connections, the linkages that allow information, needs, solutions to move across systems. And we believe that retention is not the responsibility of teachers alone. It is a shared responsibility of the entire systems, and that's why we take systems approach. So what kind of structures can actually support those connections in practice? So that is where our idea of hubs or approach comes in. We propose a place-based multi-membership hub as a way to bring different parts of the system into more sustained dialogue and collaboration. So when we say multi-membership, it means teachers, school leaders, unions, district officials, ministry actors, and most importantly, community partners are all part of the same space, not working in silo. Place-based means these hubs are grounded in local realities, not designed from outside. Relational infrastructure means we're building longer-term relationships and structures, not short-term or one-off goals. And most importantly, the hub itself is designed, it should be defined locally. So we believe that through our data collection and interaction with local partners, we're able to define our own definition of quote unquote hub. So authority and legitimacy belong to partners and not to us. So I've been speaking for 18 minutes and you might wonder, so what are the research questions again? Before I share these, I want to again note that these are working questions and they're meant to guide our thinking, not lock us into fixed answers. And they remain open to refinement with our partners and with your engagement. So first we ask, what are the international and national policy interventions related to teacher retention and well-being in Senegal, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe? This question helps us understand what already exists on paper, how retention and well-being are being defined in policy, and where there may be gaps between policy intentions and practice. Second, we ask, how is teacher retention perceived and supported by education stakeholders in Sub-Saharan Africa? Here, we're interested in how teachers, school leaders, and other key stakeholders understand retention in their own terms and what kinds of support they see as realistic and meaningful. Then we ask, how can multi-membership place-based networks and hubs contribute to addressing the long-term challenge of teacher retention and well-being? And this moves us from description to more possibility, if I may say. It asks whether these hubs can become practical spaces for collaboration, problem solving, and sustained support across systems. Or there could be other formality other than hubs and networks. Last but not least, we ask, how can the design and practices of these hubs contribute to more equitable educational opportunities for children and young people? And this is our equity question. It reminds us that retention is not an end in itself, and it matters because it shapes which communities have access to stable, qualified, and supported teachers. These questions move from policy to perception to practice to finally to equity. And they reflect our attempt to connect systems, relationships, and justice in one coherent research agenda, which is still work in progress. Now, I want to show you how we're thinking about turning those questions into a practical collaborative research process. Phase one is about grounding ourselves. We review existing research, build relationships, complete ethics review, and design tools that are respectful and usable in local contexts. And this is where I truly believe that listening begins. Phase two is where the project becomes truly or visibly collaborative. Through seminars, workshop, and a symposium, we co-design priorities and approaches with partners rather than finalizing them in advance. And we also welcome our GW colleagues in the upcoming symposium that we're hoping to host here at GW in person or even virtually. We would welcome your expertise in school leadership and teacher education or regional expertise to further hone these research agenda. Phase three is where the hubs take place, hopefully. We establish the relational infrastructure, begin data collection, and see how these spaces function in practice. How they function or not, and why in practice. Last but not least, phase four, this is not just about reporting results. It's about learning from the process and developing shared theories of change that can inform longer-term partner-led work. I also want to emphasize that this is already underway. We have begun conversation with our colleagues in Zimbabwe and other countries, and we're hoping to make our first visit sometime in the spring. Before that, we'll be meeting with Spencer Foundation in February, where we hope to further refine our approaches and our systems change model together with our local partners. I know there are some travel restrictions starting from tomorrow, but we hope to have more colleagues joining us in person or virtually to provide their inputs about this important system change framework. I have to be honest, sometimes this process of, building the plane as we fly could be difficult. Managing different country contexts, timelines, uncertainty is a learning curve for me. But I'm approaching this with flexibility and patience and humility, and because that is essential for participatory and decolonial research, especially when we're not the drivers of the agenda, but collaborators of it. So I want to share my insights on that. I want to share, before I end, I want to share who is involved in this project, not as a roster of names, but as a statement of positionality as well. Our team includes 2 UNESCO chairs who bring complementary strength, regional expertise across different partners of Sub-Saharan Africa, topical expertise in teacher policy, well-being and education systems, and deep experiences in policy analysis, comparative work, and project management. They allow us to bridge research, policy, practice in a way that would not be possible individually. So shout out to all our project members. We're also a team of researchers working closely with outstanding graduate research assistants. I know some of you are here. They're not just supporting logistics or data collection, but you are our intellectual partners who shape how questions are asked, how evidence is interpreted, and how relationships are built. So thank you. At the same time, I want to be transparent about something that matters ethically. That, as you can see, this project is initiated and funded by institutions in the global north. That positionality carries real risk, especially the risk of reproducing the same power hierarchies that many of us are trying to challenge. So I share our team not to celebrate capacity alone, but to acknowledge responsibility. I want to close this presentation with this quote because it captures the core of everything we have been discussing. Teacher shortages cannot be solved through recruitment alone. They are shaped by motivation, training, working conditions, social status, and professional recognition. This is not a technical problem with a technical fix. It is a systemic and moral question about how societies choose to value teachers. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and I truly look forward to our learning from our conversation. And these are some of the resources that you can see for the statistics. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cha, for that. And we already have a very high level of engagement in the chat, so I cannot wait for the Q&A. So without further ado, I will introduce the respondent for this 2026 MLK lecture, and that is my friend, Dr. Laura Engel. Dr. Laura Engel is a professor of international education, international affairs here at both GSEHD and Elliott, who directs the Global Education Lab and is the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair in International Education for Development, which for those of you who don't know is a pretty big deal. She's an honorary professor of international education development at the University of Nottingham, which is in the UK, and is the partner for this particular project. Dr. Engel considers herself a policy sociologist and comparative education scholar whose research explores multilateralism, the influence of global educational policy trends in both national and regional systems worldwide. Her interdisciplinary and international research has been supported by the National Geographic Association, the American Educational Association, the Stevens Initiative. Dr. Engel is the author of 4 books and more than 85, and that is out of date at this point, articles, chapters, policy briefs, and she is recognized an educator and honored with several teaching awards, including the 2022 Martin A. Bender Teaching Award. And most recently, Dr. Engel was a Fulbright Scholar in Costa Rica from 2023 to 2024. My friends, please welcome for the response, Dr. Laura Engel.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. First, congratulations to you, Dr. Wright, on sparking and continuing this amazing initiative here at GSEHD. This is an honor to be here, and this is thanks to you and everyone at GSEHD who works behind the scenes to get this off the ground and keep it going. I also come to learn that you and I have something in common, which is that we both got in trouble for talking too much in school. Probably those who know both of us probably aren't too surprised by that. Thank you to Dr. Cha, and congratulations for giving this year's MLK lecture and offering so many things to think about. She lays out an ambitious and a very timely research agenda funded by the Spencer Foundation Vision Grant, aimed at very clearly robust, transformative change. So could we please give her another round of applause, the snaps, the flying emojis, as we give her a little bit of a breath before she addresses some of your hard-hitting questions and issues that you're raising. And please do keep the chat going. Really great conversation is already getting started. Very honored to be here and giving a response to Jay's lecture. And let me first share very briefly how I come to this project. And I think Dr. Wright's bio gives some insight into the blend of work that is kind of at the intersections of both education and international affairs. But But I want to sort of say a couple things about that because it will hopefully position a little bit more of my response. So I teach and study topics of global citizenship education, global governance and multilateralism, and care very deeply about people-to-people connections as a form of diplomacy and peacemaking. And the current world that we live in has sort of helped clarify that for me much more acutely. Like many here tonight, I care also very deeply about public educators. I'm the daughter of a public school teacher who taught in Michigan and the south side of Chicago for over 40 years. I taught myself in the south side of Chicago after college, supported teachers both in the US and global research projects as a graduate student and postdoctoral researcher. And coming to GW in 2009, I was hired by Dean Mary Futrell, who some of you may know, was and is a very important figure in public education, supporting educators. I recently ended a 6-year-long service on the board of the NEA Foundation, which Dean Futrell created, and which carries out its important work both locally and globally in support of public educators. So much like Dr. Wright's introduction, sort of say this as a big shout out to our public school educators, or public educators. And I say all of it also to frame my enthusiasm that we have such a project like this here at GW that brings together both globally oriented work and work on teachers, and that it's the feature of this year's MLK lecture. I also mentioned, much of this as background as I see these as two sets of perspectives or lenses, one that's a bit more around international affairs in the current juncture, in the current times, and the other focused on teachers. And so the comments that I'm making, the questions that I'm posing have come at the intersection of international affairs and education. So first, let's consider a wider perspective beyond education. Jay mentioned quite a bit about system and systemic reform. And here we're thinking a lot about transforming systems. Now, those of us who work in education know that the broader political, economic, and cultural context always shapes the world and inner workings of education. We can't separate it. And from the perspective of international affairs, when I think about the broader context that surrounds this project, we really are at a critical juncture. A year ago at this time, we saw the shuttering of USAID, shifting US commitments to international education development, having direct impacts on projects such as these. Last month, the US pulled out of 66 international treaties. Last week, there was an indefinite pause in visas of individuals from 75 countries. Over the past year, major shift in the US federal workforce away from international engagement toward more inward America First policy. What then does it mean to focus on research in partnership with colleagues across the Atlantic, across continents, at a time of such major disruption to the established channels of international education and development since the post-World War II era? What does it mean to turn our individual attention not away from comparative and globally oriented research at this time of disruption, but to instead turn toward it? With so much to do in the US, why engage globally? This is precisely what Dr. Wright was talking about in his introduction, and drawing on the beautiful work of Dr. King, the spirit of the beloved community having no walls. This is an ambitious goal of building something better together for the betterment of all humanity rather than acting alone. And crucially at its core is global local partnership in mission of supporting teachers. As I was listening to the lecture, I was thinking about, my response to some of those questions I'm posing here. And this project for me is hope. It's optimism. It's not being naive toward the challenges of it, that blend of addressing an urgent problem while remaining humble about what we do not know and how we approach it. This is about agency at a time when much feels out of our control. It's also living, for those of us here at GW, the emphasis in our own institution on the need to convene globally around issues of policy significance. It's an opportunity, despite disruption, to draw UNESCO chairs together to work on common problems. Second, and very clearly portrayed in Jay's wonderful lecture, is the focus on teachers. They're really at the center. The problem statement is crystal clear. We face a shortage globally of 44 million teachers. It has major effects on educational quality and equity. These were sort of the themes that I pulled out. Systems are being tested hugely around the world. High attrition rates, placing stress on the education system to continuously replace departing teachers, while at the same time expand to meet growing student populations. Instability hits some areas harder than others, especially rural and disadvantaged urban communities. And I really want to underscore something that I heard in tonight's lecture, which is this is not merely a simple staffing issue. As Jay said, this is a dignity issue. Jay focuses us on the global nature of the problem, but also the deep contours of contextualization, framing up a position that we cannot understand these dynamics unless we do so alongside those grounded in the system. And that's really a crucial issue for comparativists, those engaging in comparative international research. And it's a challenge. And here was I was going to quote the quote around not being falling victim to the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. But now that it's been quoted by both Dr. Wright and Dr. Cha, what I want to say is this careful balance around speed and care, urgency and humility, that our team aims to work collaboratively, systematically, rigorously to examine and support approaches to address one of the most critical and urgent issues of international ed development, that of teacher retention and well-being. And like Jay, I too hope we can continue to engage newly in dialogue with others here at GW and beyond, of people who focused on teachers, teacher training, and leadership to help shed light on these dynamic issues. And that brings me to the last point or two about not presupposing answers or solutions. Jay mentions that the core of this project is developing understandings out of a collaborative, place-based set of approaches to transformation. And so what I'd like to do in the spirit of engagement is to pose a question back to Jay and pose a few questions for the audience. The first for Jay, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about localization, what that looks like here, what does it feel like, and a little bit more about your commitments to localization as a researcher generally and in this project. And then for the audience, and this is very much again inspired by Jay's invitation for critical engagement together, what feels missing? What assumptions do we need to interrogate? How and where, and I think I see some questions already in the chat around this, where might power reproduce itself unintentionally? I thank everyone. I thank you for the invitation to be part of this year's MLK lecture. Once again, congratulations to Dr. Cha, and I'm looking forward to engaging in the discussions this evening. So back over to you, Dr. Wright.
Thank you, Dr. Engel, first for acknowledging the times that we are in. I remind my colleagues and my students, education is meant to be an applied field. So if we're playing the violin as the Titanic sinks, you're not really engaging, in my opinion, in education. So thank you for that reminder. Dr. Cha, I think it's only appropriate to give you an opportunity to both respond to the response, but mainly touch that last question that Laura had. And then we will go straight from there to the chat and the Q&A. We can do that in the chat and live, so feel free to use the raise hand button if you wish to get into the queue, and I will go in the order of the chat. But Dr. Cha, a response or an answer to Dr. Engel's question before we do so.
Ooh, you should have warned me. This is a very difficult and important question. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Engel, for those responses and the question. Localization. Still grappling with the concept because it's a loaded term in international development. And people have different ways of working. So depending on where you situate yourself, the institutional culture, it could differ. For me, my understanding of localization means that, again, knowledge, priorities, decision making, all authority, all originate with local actors rather than being imported from us, external institutions. So in development research, it refers to shifting power over agenda setting, resources, and interpretation to those who are um, in the community, closest to the context. And I think that that's why you know, me personally grappling with this. Oh, we have a set of research questions already, and that gives me a bit of discomfort already, because it came from us. Usually, when we do localized research or decolonial research, research questions do not originate from the grant or from the institutions or the researchers, but from the community realities. So working closely with people from refugee backgrounds for a decade, uh, a localized agenda is designed so that all these interpretations, priorities, and even research directions are shaped with teachers and with local partners. And that is why I say the research question starts from the community rather than being delivered to them. And this came from my experiences working closely with refugee teachers in Kakuma refugee camp when I realized that one day someone told me that I am tired of people asking me questions that they're interested in. And I said, hey, and why? What do you want to be asked? And they said, I want to be asked about my successes, but people always focus on my challenges and deficits. And that shaped my ways of working in terms of how do I approach decolonial or quote unquote localized research. So I think just given the structure of this grant, we were able to collaborate. We two institutions from the global north, experts in teacher policy and retention and all that, were able to come up with this research agenda and proposed. But I think localization starts from the very beginning, where we're very open to changes, and really at the center of the research is looking at what the community is talking about. So it's again going back to where we're the listeners and we're sharing the message, not necessarily leading it. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
So I will take facilitator's privilege and start off with the first question, and let's just get the hard questions out of the way, I guess, right? I do not want to put the audience under any impression that we don't notice the same thing that you notice. I won't call it an elephant in the room, that we have an Asian scholar from South Korea and a white female scholar from America studying Sub-Saharan Africa. As an emerging scholar, and maybe Dr. Engel, you can piggyback on this as a more experienced scholar, how do you deal with that, right? Because you're coming to the situation wanting to be intensely decolonial, intensely anti-imperial, but you're coming with phenotypes, you're coming with privilege that holds the baggage of that anyway. Of course, this could apply to this project, but I'm sure there are many students out there, right? Black people that study in white rural urban America or white rural America because they are trying to combat the opioid crisis. Heterosexuals that study, the prevalence of music in gay clubs. For researchers that are going out of their way to try to help the other, how have you learned to bifurcate yourself from that? How have you learned to sort of check your privilege at the door? How you think you're doing? And any advice for researchers that are now coming to do that? Well, you, Dr. Cha, and you, Dr. Engel.
Ooh, the most difficult question or the elephant in the room. Dr. Engel, do you want to go or? I think I don't know if I have an answer that will please everyone here. I've been studying about Africa for about slightly less than 2 decades now, and still grappling with, am I the right person to do it? And that goes back to a lot of terminologies, and I think I'm becoming a little bit more and more humble and critical as I do it, because I become critical of all the terminologies that I'm using now, like helping, collaborating, working for them. I think, and that's why my positionality, situates me in a way where I don't know. There are a lot of scholars in the Global North institutions who claim that they are coming from Sub-Saharan Africa, but also with very uh, prestigious, biases, privileges, assumptions, and I also question those as well, right? So coming from a non-African background, I think this helps me become a bit more critical about my positionality, and now I'm at a stage where having worked closely with the local communities, now I'm able to connect the local voices with those who are at the elite institutions trying to change and continue to influence and unintentionally or intentionally the research agenda and all that. So I'm still at a position where I consider myself coming as a listener, and not as someone who's an expert. And that position of me being an outsider continue to shape me as a researcher in a way where I'm removing myself from the expert or insider, however long I studied in this particular region, but continuing to contribute to the discussion, but with humility. I don't know if that answered. Dr. Engel, do you want to come in?
Sure, I will piggyback on that, and I absolutely appreciate that this is the first question. It is the elephant in the room, and something that we have talked about a lot in this project. But I think for those of us who engage comparatively or internationally, the sort of insider outsider, who are we, and with what rights and privileges do we have, do we come with in terms of studying others, engaging others? Even when we work across language or linguistic barriers, we do not, we have to engage those insider outsider dynamics that reach well beyond language. And so I think the word that Jay has used, but also our team has used quite a bit, is this notion of humility, which is a core concept within global citizenship education. That when we sort of engage with others, and we toward the effort of a common humanity, that we do some with very different baggage, coming from very different places, and we do so as humbly as possible. I come from some work that we draw on a little bit in this project, which is called critical communicative methodology, and it's an attempt to bring the so-called research participant or subject of research into all decision making and planning. And so this is something that our team has continued to discuss, that the research questions we have here may not be the research questions that will be carried out throughout this project. That if we share the table, it's questioning all of our assumptions that we're making, whose knowledge is considered valuable, whose voices are heard and not heard. And so I think all of this is at the center of this, that we do not presuppose answers here to challenges, even if we face some similar challenges right here in our home DMV communities. And I think the last thing I want to say, which is, what do we do with the knowledge gained? I've learned a lot from my friend and colleague here, Jay, and maybe you can share if you feel comfortable, of how Jay has approached her research from a publication and quote unquote output standpoint, because that will be part of this. It's not just a co-design. It's that when we all walk away with collaborative knowledge gained, who benefits and in what ways, and how do we how do we see power in those ways? So, and I've learned a lot in terms of how Jay has approached that in her other projects, and I hope we will be able to learn from that and think about growing that. So, Jay, I don't know if you want to say something about what you've done to co-construct publications.
Yeah, something one of the reciprocity, beyond giving incentives for participating in research, is inviting. So I have done multiple research where I've published with youth with refugee backgrounds whose voices should be highlighted but are often neglected. As a junior scholar, I know it sometimes is challenging. Do I become the first author, or do I remain the last author, or do I just, live it up to others for to own and to claim their authorship? And I give the opportunity. I try my best to provide opportunities for these participants not only to participate in the research design, data collection processes, which we often end there, but into data analysis and research findings and publications. So I know through multiple channels where that's academic conferences, but also here at GW, I've invited my colleagues to come and speak for their own stories. So that's one approach that I'm taking, that I provide opportunities wherever available, just given my academic standing here, but also give them the voice to speak. And I want to just piggyback one more thing, that in every meeting that we have with University of Nottingham, we talk about how we're not invited, but we're inviting ourselves to these regions. So we continue to remind ourselves that we should not be taking this as a top-down approach, but more of an approach where we seek their voices and their opinions about whether or not this issue should be highlighted. And in our case, the Zimbabwean case clearly shows us that they highlight the urgency of us collaborating on this topic of teacher retention in their country, in specific regions where communities are at disadvantage. Also, we just had a conversation this morning about our approach to colonial research, and which was interesting because we have, even as a scholar who's from Sub-Saharan Africa, we had a different understanding of how decolonial research projects should be. And so I thought I was bringing, when my colleague was mentioning that this is decolonial, she was coming more from a national perspective, while I was bringing in more local perspective. So I think there are a lot of yes, challenges, but also opportunities for us as an outsider, non-African scholar, to be providing insights as we progress on the project. Thank you.
No, thank you both. I think it's a interesting topic, a necessary topic. Even we have research methods here at GSEHD, and even in those courses, we don't get the opportunity to engage with our scholars and really our students with issues like this that we all will face. More as America Browns, but as the local becomes global. So I think it's a conversation that we need to continue. Folks, we've got about 20 more minutes. I know I see one hand in the room. I'm going to try to get all the questions in if I can in that 20 minutes, going back and forth between the chat and the room. I'll also maybe have to combine some questions, but feel free to keep the questions going. Raise the hand button if you wish to cut the line, I guess. Going all the way back, maybe taking a step back. Could you tell us something about the public school systems in Sub-Saharan Africa? Are they similar to America? Are they not similar to America? Are they mostly private schools, public schools, parochial, vouchers? Just sort of give us a sort of general, very quick summary and overgeneralization, of course, because Sub-Saharan Africa is massive, about what the school systems there look like.
Um, sure. I'm not sure if I can speak much about the comparison with the US, but I can speak about some other contexts where education is at stake. Because, for example, different countries in Middle East are struggling with most of the parents preferring their kids to go to a private school instead of public education system because of all these issues. When I say teacher shortage issue, classroom quality, educational quality, teacher retention. Most of these are happening at the public school level and not, I wasn't including private education in that sense. Um, um, it's very similar in ways where some public schools are supported while others, mostly public schools are underfunded. And that's the reason why a lot of parents, if possible, are sending their kids beyond primary school. For example, in the case of Kenya, most of the parents prefer sending their kids to boarding school that are private schools. So all these issues where the teachers are experiencing burnout because of the high teacher-student ratio are experienced at the public school level. And the professional development opportunities for teachers at the public school are offered in order for you to progress into the next level of, profession, for example, to become assistant principal or vice principal or however they want to call it across different contexts. So the countries that we've selected share similar challenges in public education systems where since the early 2000s, the international community pressured them to open up the primary education to make it more universal primary education. So providing quote unquote free education for school-aged students at primary level. But again, that does not capture all these challenges that students are facing, such as the hidden cost of schooling, which I've written an article about school uniforms, all these distance to schools and all these issues. And there are less private schools. I can only speak about the context I've worked closely, which is Kenya. There are less private schools in the rural areas because also there's an issue of staffing. There are issues of additional tuition that you need to pay and also so on. So most of these highly qualified teachers are in private schools that are way distant from the rural communities. I can speak about all other contexts, but I'm just like generalizing some of the challenges that public education systems are facing.
Well, thank you both. Can we give another round of applause to Dr. Cha and give another round of applause to Dr. Engel? It is not easy, no matter how much experience you have, to get up and take a plane literally being built in progress up into the sky. And I think you both did it with gusto, and I give you appreciation for that. As I say to each and every MLK lecturer we've had, I think we've had 6. The expectation is that you publish. So we hope around this time next year to invite you back to introduce your speaker next year, but also to give your publication. And the last